All
Okay.
right, welcome everybody. Today's a little bit different. We have a large event going out in our training room right now. They're setting up. Ari is having a big carnival event. So I'm here inside my little office and it's going to be 100% Zoom today. That won't affect any of you on Zoom. Okay, let me figure out how to share my screen. Okay, share. All right, today we are going to be going over, oh wow, that's way too much up there. The contingency of buyer property. That form is being used more and more now in this current market. So, sorry, I have so many pop-ups on my screen. All right. Can everybody see what's going on?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. It's on the last page, of course. Let me redo this. What is happening here? Sorry, guys. I don't know what is
I
happening.
think you have the annotate thing on for Zoom.
Okay, I have no idea how to not do that.
I'll be right over.
Okay, thanks. Okay. I can start. There we go. Here's my first screen. Okay. Contingency for sale of buyer's property. This is getting used more often, still not super common, but I'm seeing it a lot more and I'm getting a lot of questions on it. So I thought it'd be a great reminder for us to go over this and the common things that I see getting missed on this document. So why do we use this? First of all, the contingency for sale of buyer's property is an addendum for use when section 3L9 in the RPA is checked, and it creates a contingency for the sale of the buyer's property. So if you have a buyer and they really find a house they want, but they can't buy it without first selling their home, you can do the offer based on the contingency that their house sells. This is the form you would use, the COP. All right, I broke this down by paragraph. I'm gonna go over each little section and then we're gonna fill one out together at the end so that you can see it in practice. Section 1 is buyer's property contingency. So you'll see that it defaults to 1A, which is your buyer needs to get into contract to sell their house and they need to close escrow on the property before they can have the money to finish the purchase of the home that they want to buy. So if your buyer doesn't have their house on the market yet and they are not haven't gone into contract on it yet, you're going to want to have 1A be the standard. Now, sometimes you might use 1B, which is only entering into contract for the sale of the buyer's property. This isn't used very often because obviously we need the funds from the house to close before we can close on the property they want to purchase the vast majority of the time. But in some cases, this might be the only contingency they need, and that you would go ahead and click 1B. And then finally, 1C is if only the close of escrow on the buyer's property. So let's say that it was already for sale, they already have a contract on it. You've waited this long because you know your offer has a higher likelihood of getting accepted. If you are already in contract, then you're going to put 1C, you're going to check that box and you're going to put the escrow information in there. Okay, so let's see what it has to say about this. The usual intention of having such a contingency is the buyer needs the funds from the sale of the property to close the escrow. So yes, that's right. If paragraph 1C is checked, it limits the contingency solely to the buyer closing escrow on the sale of their property. Buyer must provide the required evidence that their property is already in escrow. The contingency for sale of buyer's property will last the entire escrow period. So that's a good thing I want to point out. There are usually two contingencies created, especially in 1A. The first contingency is that they get into contract on their house. As soon as you get into contract on their house, you remove that first contingency. The second contingency is the closing of that escrow, and that will last the entire escrow period unless we change that date a little bit later on in the contract. But the vast majority of the time, that contingency period will stay the entire time until the house closes. All right. Paragraph 2, this is where we get to play with some dates. Buyer entering into contract for sale of buyer's property. So if 1A or 1B apply, remember those are the two that state that they need to enter into contract on their house. They are not already in escrow. Then the standard is 2A. You have 17 days after acceptance to enter into a contract for the sale of buyer's property. Now, depending on the market that you're in, the desirability of the home and the price that your buyer is motivated to put it up for sale, 17 days might be perfect. Or you might need a little bit longer. Or if you think you've got a diamond and it's going to go super fast, you can shorten that time frame in 2A to make it a little bit more desirable for the seller. You could put 10 days, 5 days, whatever you think, depending on the current market and the house. Okay, so, and then 2B is by the earlier of the specified time in 2A or within 2 days after buyer enters into contract for the sale of the buyer's house, the buyer shall deliver escrow evidence to the seller. So that's stating you either have until that date you agreed upon, those 17 days, or whatever the days that you put in there that you agreed upon, to give them that escrow information, or within 2 days of it going into contract. So let's say you're in agreement for 17 days, but on day 10, you get an accepted offer. We have 2 days after day 10 to get them that escrow evidence, or they can give you a notice to perform and potentially cancel on you. We'll get into those rights in a little bit, but this is something that's often overlooked. I've been on the listing side and buyers got into contract like a week ago and they didn't bother to tell the listing side. So just be aware that you have 2 days after you accepted an offer on the buyer's home to give the escrow evidence to the listing agent. And that can be page 17, where it actually is the escrow evidence, where they have the escrow officer has signed it, or something to that effect. You don't need to give them the full purchase agreement or anything like that. All right, paragraph 3 provides the seller information about whether the buyer has a current listing agreement or not. Seller can set a time limit for the buyer to enter into a listing agreement. Okay, so if your buyer has already signed a listing agreement with you, you are going to write that information in on 3A. You're going to put Century 21 Jordan Lake. If they have not, because maybe your buyer's like, hey, I don't want to put my house up for sale until this is accepted because I'm not selling. I only want this one house. If that's the case, you're going to mark the box or shall right here. Within 3 days, you could lower this. You can make this higher date, 5 days or something if you need a little time to get it on the market. If you do that, you're going to have a less likelihood of getting your offer accepted. So I would leave that at 3 or try to get them to get it listed as soon as possible. Okay. Paragraph 3 also requires that the buyer provide seller proof of the listing, and if applicable, proof of entering the property into the MLS. So it states you're going to need to give them the copy of like the agent MLS, the information once it's live. And then 3B really wants to make sure that the property is listed in the local geographical MLS where the property lives, right? So let's say their house that they need to sell is up in Northern California. The listing agent's not going to want you to put it in the Fresno MLS only. So 3B is stating that you are actually putting it into the MLS where the house is in its geographical area, not just up here. Okay, if you're not, you're gonna have to check that the buyer's property will not be submitted into its own MLS area. A lot of agents don't even look at this section, but I want to point it out to you that it is there, and if you're on the listing side, it's something that you need to pay attention to. All right, moving on. And please jump in if you have any questions about anything. I feel like I'm going a little fast today. All right, section 4, close of escrow of a buyer's property if 1A or 1C apply. Remember, 1A and 1C both state that they have the contingency the entire time and their home needs to close. Okay, paragraph 4 provides that the default period for sale of the buyer's property contingency will last the entire contract. Okay. By checking the box in paragraph 4, that time period can be shortened to 5 days or another agreed upon time before the scheduled close of escrow on seller's property. So this is stating that the seller wants this house done and closed 5 days before we close on ours. I'm not sure what the benefit of that would actually be. I've never seen this checked. Usually they close concurrently or as close to concurrently as they can. So this isn't something that I think you need to really pay hard attention to. If you have a situation that you've come across and this was something that really helped you, then please pipe in and share your story with us. I'd love to hear about that. Okay. Section 5, status of sale of buyer's property. It requires that the buyer keep seller informed about the status of the sale of buyer's property and gives seller the right to require that buyer show proof of the removal of contingencies by the purchaser of buyer's property. Okay, so basically this is stating, please keep your listing agent up to date. They want to know what's going on with the buyer's home. So if, when time comes and the contingencies are to be removed on the buyer's house that they have for sale, you have to let the listing agent know. And well, I guess you don't have to. Let me read that part. It says, after seller's written request. Okay. So as the buyer, you don't automatically have to give it to them. But as written request, if they ask in an email, whatever, you are required to give them that information and keep them up to date on what's going on with your buyer's sale of their property. Okay. Paragraph 6 says, requires that the buyer deliver written notice to seller if either buyer or the purchaser of the buyer's property cancels the contract. Okay, so if that happens to fall out, which it's happened before, you have 2 days to let the listing side know that it has fallen out. At that point, it's either going to cancel also, or you might come to some negotiation where you get some more time to get back into contract with another purchaser for the buyer's home. And that's going to be situational. Okay, now section 7, backup offers and seller right to require buyer to remove contingencies or cancel. Okay, so this is stating that the seller has continued rights to keep marketing the property to get a backup offer. You can't ask them to not do that. They have to comply with the MLS rules. And the MLS rules, at least in Fresno, state that they can't keep it active on the market, but they can put it pending accepting backup or whatever your MLS is. It needs to know that it's in contract, but they're accepting backup offers and they can continue to show it and they can get that backup offer. If the seller gets a backup offer and they would rather go with that offer for whatever reason, they have rights to do that. And in section 7B, it talks about that. If selected, the seller accepts a written backup offer and provides buyer a copy of the signed accepted backup offer within the time frames, and we'll talk about those in a minute. Seller shall have the right to give written notice to buyer in writing to remove the contingency for the sale of their house, to remove the loan contingency, and to provide verification of sufficient funds to close without the sale of buyer's property. So basically, how could you do that? It's not even letting you like put in a loan contingency at that point. It's pretty clear that it's stating you're going to be kicked out if you can't close this without the funds. Okay, and then it says that how do we give the written notification? The very bottom of the page and has a section for the seller to give notice that they have a backup offer that they have accepted, and they need to give you proof of that. Okay, so we want to try to prevent that, right, as the buyer agent. So we're going to jump down to 7C. This is something that is missed a lot. And when I see these come through, or when I'm helping an agent fill out their forms, this section is not understood. Okay, so the standard is that the seller would have the immediate right to tell the buyer, I have a backup offer, you need to you need to remove all these contingencies or I'm canceling. Okay, that's the standard. So you need to be aware and check a box. Number 2 is the delayed right to notify. You'll notice that the standard for that is 17 days, and you can change that days after acceptance. Okay, so that might be better. You'll be covered for the time where they're trying to get a buyer for their home. However, even once they have the buyer, they're not going to be able to completely remove it without their home selling. So the last option is C3, which is no right to notify the buyer. And that means that no matter how long until we have closed this, basically, they cannot push you out if they have a backup offer. However, they still can, for the entire escrow period, continue to market and try to get backup offers. Okay, so keep this in mind for both listing side and selling side. If you're the buyer, you're going to want to check C3. But if you're the listing side, you might want to make sure that C3 isn't checked and try to go with counter that out for something that protects your sellers a little more. And again, that's going to depend on the market, the specific situation. If the house that they want to purchase has been on the market for a while, they might be more agreeable to agree to no right to notify the buyer. That's again going to be situational. Okay. Okay, seller for the sale of the buyer's property. So, you'll notice that the majority of the time it says they have to give a written notice to buyer to perform. So there is the form, notice to buyer to perform, and then there are things that you can make them perform on. Number 1 is providing the proof of funds, um, fails to enter into contract on their house within the days that you agreed upon, not giving the escrow information, not giving escrow evidence. There's 9 things in there, and some of them are kind of nitpicky, like, oh, you didn't give me the page 17 to show that you were in contract. I mean, so you got to make sure that you're on top of this when you're on the buyer side, well, the listing side, asking for these things. But this is all designed so that you guys can stay in great communication with each other and get it to close for both parties, because the goal of real estate is to sell homes and get your clients happy with their home purchase and their sale. Okay, so communicate, communicate, communicate. How can a buyer cancel? Well, we know buyers have a lot more rights than sellers do, but specifically just for this COP form, they can cancel if they cannot find a buyer for their home, or if their home was in contract and it fell out of escrow. That would be another reason to cancel. And then, of course, they still have all of their other reasons to cancel, which would be inspections, insurance, review of disclosures, appraisal, loan, whatnot. All right, this is an often missed one. It's at the bottom of page 2. Well, middle of the bottom of page 2 is one of the last things you can fill out. This causes confusion a lot with agents, but it's very important. time for performance of contract obligations and delivery of buyer deposit. Okay, so when you're filling out your purchase agreement, of course you have to put the close of escrow, and most of the time that's 30 days. So we'll just go off of what typically happens, 30 days, right? Okay. But let's say you need those 17 days to get your buyer's home into contract. Well, if it took the 17 days and you have to close in 30, then you're left with less than 15 days to get their house closed and close on this one. So, number one, do we put 45 days or how do we handle this? What happens if like we don't want to do our inspections yet because we don't want to be out that amount, or we don't want to do the appraisal yet on the property we're purchasing because we don't want to be out of pocket that amount if we can't find someone to purchase our house? So that's where the number section 11 comes in handy. So you need to notice that the standard is that the time periods in the agreement for the inspection contingencies, covenants, close of escrow, and all the obligations are on the date the agreement is accepted, right? Okay, so that means it's accepted, the clock starts immediately. Okay, so that means you would have to close in less than 15 days if you had a 30-day escrow on there, and you have to do your inspections and you have to get the appraisal. So if you want to wait until your buyer has an accepted offer on their home, then you're going to check the box right here in 11A that says our time periods do not begin until we have an accepted offer on our property, until we give you that escrow evidence and we remove that first contingency of finding a buyer for our home. And that way, everything else begins at that time. So it just depends again on the specific situation of your clients. This would protect the buyer from not having that money come out of pocket. However, it might not be advantageous for the listing side because if they if the buyer may cancel due to inspections, they're going to want that to happen sooner than later. So they might say, no, I want it to happen. I want all the timelines to happen now so that we know if there's an issue and they're going to back out for inspection reasons. So it's just, again, up to the negotiation and the current climate of the market, and also how well both agents are paying attention to section 11. So that's why I really want to point this out. And then 11B is the same thing, but this is specifically talking about the earnest money deposit. The standard is that as soon as it is accepted, the earnest money needs to go to escrow. Or if you check the box, earnest money will go to escrow 3 days after the home goes into the buyer's home goes into contract. Okay, as a seller, I would always counter this out because I want them to have some skin in the game prior to them even having their house under contract. Okay, it would be, I just feel that's fair. Okay, moving on, we are just about done. Yes, questions. Okay, questions about what I just went over. Please pipe up and let me know. Anyone?
Yeah, I think you can unmute yourself too if you'd like to ask a question verbally.
And I can't see the chat mitts. Do you see if anybody wrote anything? There's one chat popped up. Okay. Okay, so really quick here, I'm just gonna fill one out so that we can see it without it being broken up. Okay, so here's what the COP form looks like. The most updated version came out last June. They haven't done any updates this year, which is fine. Okay, this is an addendum to the purchase agreement. Okay, that's what it's going to be too, because we're writing this offer from the beginning and we're including it. And dated, this date is going to be the date that we dated the purchase agreement. Not that it's accepted, because remember, we're submitting this at the same time as our offer. So I'm writing this offer right now. I'm going to put today's date. Okay, I have this 1, 2, 3 contract class is the house that I want to purchase. I'm Bobby Buyer, Susie Seller, and then Bobby Buyer needs to sell his house at 134 Front Street in Clovis. It's hard to type with my laptop. Up at okay, 93619. Wow. Okay. Now, I need them to enter into contract and I also need it to close. So I'm not going to do anything because 1A is the standard. Okay. If I had already been into contract, I would check C and I would put the escrow number, the escrow officer, and the date that it's scheduled to close. Okay. Now, where right now, how long do I think like realistically? And the house that I'm buying, I want to buy contract class, has been on the market for 60 days and they don't have any other offers. So I'm going to push my luck and I'm going to put 25 days in there to give us a little bit more time. And we'll see if they'll counter it out. Now, if we're in a multiple offer situation, I'm not going to do anything that would extend anything and make this look less appealing to the seller. Okay, buyer has signed a listing agreement for the buyer's property. Well, we haven't signed yet because again, they really love this house, but this house only, and they don't want to sell unless they get this house. So I'm going to check this box, which gives me 3 days after this seller accepts this offer, if they do, to get a listing agreement going. So I'm going to put Century 21, Jordan Link. Okay. Now moving on, I'm going to jump down. All of this I agree to. We're good. I understand how they can cancel. I can understand. Okay, now I'm at the backup offer section. I don't want them to have immediate right to notify me to remove everything and cancel. I could do delayed, but considering this house has been on the market a while, I'm going to just ask for no right to notify the buyer. And again, they can counter that out. Okay, this is the information about the rights of the seller to cancel, the rights of the buyer to cancel, and now here we are at number 11. Now my buyer, again, doesn't want to pay for inspections right up front if he doesn't have an accepted offer on his property, and he doesn't want to pay for the appraisal either. So I'm going to check this box right here, showing that our timelines are going to start after he accepts an offer on his property. But I do think it's fair that he gives his earnest money now when the offer's accepted, so I'm not going to check this one. And then I'm going to send this for signatures, and we are done. Okay? That's simple. All right, guys, that is pretty much it for that. Unless you guys have questions, please unmute yourselves or pop it in the chat, and I can answer those. Anybody?
I thought that was very well explained.
Okay, great.
Oh,
Well,
wait a minute.
yeah. Oh, thanks, Amy.
Oh, good old Amy.
Love Amy. Okay, guys. Well, I'm always here if you ever have any questions about forms or anything like that, and you can reach out to me, email, text, call, whatever. And this is going to go on to our YouTube channel too.
Correct.
Okay,
Thank you,
guys.
Jessica.
Have a great rest of your day.